Well, good morning. Since it got so quiet, welcome everyone. My name is Melissa Spangler, and I have the privilege of working with Tammy and a couple other people, chamber members, to program Success in 90. And so it's our privilege to have Leslie Beale here today, and I'd like to introduce Leslie, and we will get started. Leslie is the CEO and founder of Profusion Strategies, LLC, which is an executive and leadership development firm focused on helping mission-critical leaders and teams develop top-notch results. Leslie has 20 years of experience in building and leading teams and hundreds of hours of training and experience in coaching and developing leaders. Prior to launching Profusion Strategies, Leslie spent 15 years as an attorney and executive in a variety of settings, including international corporations, large regional firms, and high-growth startups. Leslie draws on her first-hand experience as well as extensive training as a professional coach, facilitator, and trainer to help clients develop strategies to face their biggest professional challenges. So let's welcome Leslie.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here this morning. Can everybody hear me okay? You guys are good? Okay. If I drift off, you let me know. Wave a hand in the back row. I'm also going to move around a lot. If I get out of the camera, we're going to give me the wave to settle down. But I'm super excited about this topic. This tends to be a really fun kind of conversation to have. So I would encourage you to ask the questions that you want to ask, to share the stories that you want to share. I'm really here so that you get what you came to get this morning. So don't just sit there quietly. Don't save your questions till the end. I would much prefer us to have this back and forth conversation as we go, okay? What is it about generations right now that is so difficult? Well, this is one of the things that's unprecedented. And after COVID, we're probably all a little worn out with the word unprecedented. I probably have said the word unprecedented more than I said in 15 years of practicing law. It tends to be a little bit of a lawyer word, but still, we said it more in 2020 than we said it in 15 years of practice. But we are in unprecedented times when it comes to generations in the workplace, because right now, depending on your particular workplace, you may have as many as 5 different generations working, right? So how many of you have somebody on your workforce that's over 75? Yeah. How many of you have somebody in your workforce that's under 25? So those of you who just raised your hands twice, you have 5 generations in the workforce, right? 5 generations in the workforce. Well, why does that matter? Why does it matter about generations? And one of the things I want to make clear from the beginning is we're going to do something today that's always a little bit dangerous, right? And that is that we're going to make generalizations about human beings, right? So before we start, what I want you to know is I want you to think about your generation like this. Where you think back to your high school cafeteria, right? All of the people in your high school cafeteria were roughly the same age as you, and they were certainly in the same generation as you. Were they all identical? Did you want to hang out with all of them? Right? Did all of them have the same morals and values and likes and dislikes as you? No. So that's a good way to think about generations. Everyone in that high school lunchroom was shaped by the same events, was shaped by the same political atmosphere, the same economic atmosphere, the sort of way that work was done at that time, shaped by the technology that was present, but they didn't all come out of that high school experience and those social experiences exactly the same. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking about generations, because generations, it's a useful classification. It's a useful way to talk about shared experiences. But even within generations, there are going to be individual differences. And we run the risk whenever we group people together and say, everybody in this generation is this way, right? Just like we run that risk when we say all men are this way and all women are this way, right? So just a little asterisk at the beginning to be a little bit careful about how you think about these things, okay? So who's in our workplace? And These numbers are going to smidge. They're going to smudge around 1 year, 2 years, sometimes 3 or 4 years, depending on the sources that you look at. But basically, the 5 generations that are possible for you to have in the workplace right now are the silent generation. Now, it wasn't so long ago that it was unheard of to have somebody over 75 or 76 years old in your workplace. But because of the advances in healthcare, because we are generally healthier, and because many of us have embraced this idea that retirement isn't all that great, right? We have more of these people in our workforce. Are we losing them? Yes, right? We are losing them, not just in our workforce, but we're losing them, period. But many of you, and depending on the audience that I'm talking to, many of you may have these people in their workforce, okay? Boomers, right? If you are like me and you're raising teenage children, you may think you're a boomer and you may actually not be a boomer. I remind my children all the time, I'm not actually a boomer. I'm just older than you. It does not make me a boomer. Boomers are 57 to 76 roughly. They're that generation that was born right after World War II. They are still one of the biggest generations in the workforce today. And we're going to talk about why boomers are so important to managing your workforce, but we're seeing a lot of demographic change. Why? Because these folks are reaching retirement age. And they're making the decision right now, do they stay or do they go? And so you need to make the decision, do you need them? Which ones of them do you need, and how do you keep them if you want to keep them in your workforce? Gen Xers, this is a big part of your workforce right now. It's a small generation. One of the things to remember about the power of generations is that they drive their power based on their size. So one of the reasons, how many of you are Gen Xers? I bet a fair amount of you in here like me, Gen Xers. One of the reasons we often get this thing about everybody skips us, they talk about boomers and they talk about the millennials and nobody ever talks about us, right? You've seen all those memes and things. It's because relatively speaking, there aren't that many of us. Boomers are a giant generation. Millennials are a big generation, and we're a relatively small generation stuck sort of in the middle of them. And we'll talk about how that played out in the workforce and how it's played out in the way Gen X views work and how they view millennials, okay? But remember that size differential has a big part to play in how much power these generations bring to the workforce. And then Gen Z, I've had several conversations with folks that I know are millennials. Millennials are next. How many of you complained about millennials? Come on. Come on. We've all, sorry millennials, we've all done it. Millennials are this generation right below Gen X, right, depending on where you fall in that range. But the thing to remember about millennials, sorry guys, you're not as young as you used to be, right? None of us are. But millennials, we tend to think of as sort of the young people in the workforce. Your oldest millennials, these folks that they lovingly call geriatric millennials, that's such a nice term, right? I don't know who came up with that, but geriatric millennials may be as old right now as 41 or 42, right? So they're really in the heart of your workforce as well. It's really the heart of your sort of biggest numbers in your workforce are likely to fall in millennials and Gen X right now, okay? Then Gen Z, these are the people that are just entering the workforce out of school, right? Whether that's high school, vocational school, college, all of those folks generally fall into Gen Z. So I've had conversations with millennials lately where they're like, these young people coming out of school, right? And it makes me laugh because I want to say, yeah, we all said that about you too. But they're a different generation, and they are different in really, really important ways, certainly than Gen X and even than millennials, okay? So that's just a broad view of where we're going to go and the generations we're going to cover. I do want to talk about the differences in these generations and why they maybe have some of those differences, because one of the key takeaways that I want you to leave here today is understanding why people are the way they are. Right? If we understand that generational differences are largely driven by experience, by the rules of the road when people came of age, then we can bring to our interactions with one another this greater understanding of where the other person is coming from. So we're going to do a pretty deep dive into each generation. But before we do, I'd love to hear from you. What challenges have you had in working with other generations in your workforce? Communication. Do you have an example? Okay.
No, not really.
Okay. Communication. What else? This is funny story time.
Keeping Gen Z's off their phone while they do work.
Keeping Gen Z off their phone long enough to do work. Yeah.
I was going to say technology.
Technology. Yeah. Just this problem with technology or other problems with technology?
All of it.
All of it.
All the way around.
Okay. Everybody's different when it comes to technology. Yeah. That's true.
TikTok examples. Like, just look at the way Congress is handling TikTok. TikTok.
Uh-huh.
You know?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we don't even have shared language.
Yeah.
Right? That's really, that gets to your idea about communication. Shared language becomes really, really important. What else? Yeah?
When she said communication, I think about communication style. You know, for some of the younger generation, having a meeting or a phone call that could have been an email or a text to them.
Mm-hmm. So I have a client who, my contact at the organization does a lot of the training materials, and she was telling me the other day, we have to have it in writing because we have a lot of people who are sort of coming out of retirement and wanting to work part-time, so we need to train them, and they want to read it. They want it on a piece of paper, and they want to read it. Then we have to have, for some people, like a diagram, because that's the way that they are used to onboarding information. Some people want live training. And some people, we just need to give them a QR code that goes to a 3-minute video. Now, that's funny, except any of you who've developed training or pushed training out to large organizations, how much do you think that's costing? A lot. A lot in terms of time and a lot in terms of dollars too, right? So communication becomes one of these things that sort of underlies a lot of our problems. What else? Let me put this differently. What drives you crazy about working with people who are a different generation than you are? Yep.
When you try to explain something to them, you know, and to make sure they do something right. Oh, I know. They think they know everything.
Okay. Okay.
Performance feedback and the different styles you have to do with that.
Yeah. People like feedback, and they take on feedback differently. Yeah. What else?
Expectations of what the work day should be. Meaning show up at 8 and go home at 5, or come when you feel like it and leave when you feel like it.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Like, the younger generation wants to make their own schedule, or the older generation can accept a schedule to give them.
Right. Okay, so we've complained a lot about younger people. So I'm not going to call on you, but anybody younger in the group brave enough to say, yeah, but this is what drives me crazy the other way? Okay. Thank you.
So my parents are boomers. They're also clients. So I have to coach them into spending money on computer hardware at a minimum every 5 years. My dad is like, well, I bought it 10 years ago.
Why doesn't it work?
Why doesn't it? Did it just stop working? And it's like, well, hey, that's not really how the world works, Dad. You know, we planned obsolescence.
Yes.
We talk about that a lot with our clients. Is, hey, just because it's working today doesn't mean you shouldn't budget for this. Because when they'd buy a car in the 70s, and it could still run today if you took good care of it.
Right.
And that's just not the case necessarily.
Yeah, great.
Similar to technology, you know, with us, we have a very diverse workforce, and you know, a lot of the technology like two-factor authentication, a lot of the older people, you know, they don't understand that they need their cell phone for that, or why they have to do that. Or we even have some, you know, we send out text messages to all our staff for certain meetings and reminders and things like that. Well, we still have a certain group that they don't want to get text, and so we have to kind of like, and a lot of things kind of have to hold their hands and help them do, whereas you can send it to a 25-year-old and they have it done in 5 minutes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I think of direct deposit, like, a lot of, and I am Gen X, but a lot of the older generations, they don't want direct deposit. They want, you know, that paper check in their hand. don't put a direct deposit.
My husband is an extra like me, and he won't do direct deposit unless they just make him do it. And he also won't go through the drive-through conveyance, which drives me bonkers. Yes.
Change resistance.
Yes.
Being stuck in their ways potentially and trying to convince them that there's a possibly newer, better way could be hard.
Some of this has to do with the difference, and we'll talk about this when we get into specific generational topics, but some of this has to do with the pace of change around us when we're coming of age. Those of us who have grown up with computers changing every 4 years, right? Technology changing every 4 years, that's just part of who we are. It's part of our world, and if you didn't grow up that way, that's a hard shift to make.
What about personal problems, like at home, that I don't experience, because I don't have kids. I don't have grandkids, I don't have, you bring something, well, not you, that's the difference.
Yeah, older folks bring more stuff, right? You're just there to work.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've heard that one before. And that one goes all different ways. I've also heard people who are older say, I'm tired of hearing about their kids at work, right? It just goes all different ways. Yep.
That kind of goes into also, health issues when you have an older workforce. You'll have them out of work more often than a lot of your younger people for different issues that they have.
Yeah. One more.
Tolerance levels.
Tolerance for what?
Yeah, tolerance for anything.
Any difference?
Tolerance versus intolerance.
Yes, okay. And which end of the spectrum do you find to be more tolerant?
The lower end
Okay.
of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Flexibility,
Yeah.
more flexibility, yeah. So the point is that we all show up in the workforce and we drive each other crazy, right? We drive each other crazy because we're different. And whether we admit it or not, there is a part of every human being that wishes everyone else was just like us, right? How many times have you silently thought, why can't they just bloop? And if you were being honest with yourself, whatever's in the bloop is do it the way I do it. See this the way I see it. Think about this the way I think about it. Adapt to this change because it makes perfect sense, right? Part of what drives the problem is that we all expect one another to be exactly the same, even though if I asked you logically, none of you would say that's the case. None of you would say that's the case. So let's talk about these generations and how they got to be the way that they are and some of the key differences. And then we're going to move into talking about some tips and strategies to sort of bridge the gap between us. But let's start here with the silent generation. These are the oldest folks in your workforce. What do you think shaped the silent generation? Remember, older than 76. What are the factors that shaped who they are? War. Depression. Some of them. It depends on how old they are. So if you do the math on 76, that's 1947, I think. I did that math yesterday, not this morning. So 1947. So they weren't really shaped necessarily by their own experience, depending on where they fall between 76 and 99. But they were definitely shaped by their parents' responses to the Depression, to the war. Like my dad was born in 1943. He didn't meet his dad until he was 4 years old, and he came back from the war. Right.
Instead of blended families and divorce after divorce after divorce.
That's right. That's right. What else shaped them?
Previous career. A lot of the guys work with us, worked 35, 40 years in one place.
They also lived through some pretty significant economic turmoil. My mom is a little bit younger than this, so she's 73. She's gonna love. Please don't show my mom this video. Shouldn't have done that. But they will talk about how high interest rates were when they were trying to buy their first home, right? And I know we like to talk about that now, but it was like 12%, 11%, 12%. Crazy sorts of economic turmoil that we don't really experience, those of us. We've certainly lived through 2008, but they were really shaped by some of those things. So they also grew up in a world with no technology, right? You ever talk to folks in this generation, many of them didn't have a home phone, right? And if they did, they had a party line. You hear folks talk about party lines, right? Where it went to more than one house. So they grew up without technology. They are certainly not what we call digital natives, who we had that cell phone or that iPad in their hands when they were 4 years old. They grew up totally without it. Many of them grew up without television, certainly without color television. They were a radio-based generation, right? So they are going to be slower to adapt. Now, they will adapt, right? How many of you know people in this age group who will maneuver Facebook like a boss to see pictures of their kid or their grandkids, right? If the why is big enough, they'll figure this out, right? If the why is big enough, right? So that's going to be key in all of this, is remembering what people's motivations are. They really value face-to-face interaction. Why?
Because that's what they're used to.
That's what they're used to. What did it take to write a memo for these folks in the workplace? A secretary, a notepad, a pencil, time for that secretary to leave the office, write the memo, turn it back, proof it, mark it up, make the edits, bring it back, right? That's the world these folks grew up in. So if they can just walk down the hall and talk to you, that's what they're going to do. So I was doing this workshop with a group of estate planning attorneys and financial planners, and one of the attorneys in the group said, sometimes I need it in writing because I need to go back to it later, and I can't get the older people in my office to send me an email. I will send an email and I will say, please respond in writing, and they will come down and talk to me. This is why, right? This is why. Because that used to be a big production. Many of them are not great typists, right? Many of the folks in this room grew up taking keyboarding classes, typing classes, technology classes in middle school or high school. These folks did not do that, right? They're shaped by periods of significant economic hardship, war, those sorts of things. We talked about that. As a result, they are extremely financially disciplined, right? Extremely financially disciplined. And they expect you to be extremely financially disciplined, right? This plays in, when you marry this with technology, this is the argument of, I just bought this 5 years ago, why do I need a new one, right? They come together. And the other thing to remember about generations is the closer you get to the edge of any generation, the more of the next generation's tendencies they swoop in, right? So geriatric millennials are going to have some things really in common with young Xers, right? Older Xers are going to have some things in common with younger boomers. You get there on the fringes. It's not like a hard line where the switch flips, right? People sort of meld into the next generation. But very, very disciplined financially. They typically are hard workers. And what I mean by hard workers here is not that people in other generations are not hard workers. But for them, hard work is a core value, right? This is the generation where you hear people talk about the value of a good hard day's work, right? As if that molds the character in some way. And they will expect this, and they will use it as a ruler to measure other generations, right? Oftentimes, this will come across when you come to them and say, we can do this faster, we can do this easier, we can do this with less work. That doesn't land on them the way it would land on some of us in other generations, because that seems like trying to get out of hard work. To many of us, that's efficiency, right? That's the name of the game. But depending on where it's coming from and depending on the circumstances, it doesn't necessarily land that way. They generally have a very positive relationship with authority, right? Think about their growing up experience. Do you think somebody who is 80 years old came home from school and said the teacher was mean to me and their parents rushed down and had a conference with them?
They had the paddle in school.
Right? These folks have a very strong relationship to authority. The way the media covered folks in authority was very different. They learn to have a high level of trust. Now, we're going to leave aside politics for today because it's early. There is some bubble in this right now, but generally speaking, particularly in the workforce, these folks are going to have a really, really high trust level when it comes to folks that are in authority. They will do what you ask them to do because you ask them to do it. They have a very long-term view of their career, and they are loyal to an organization. They're loyal to an organization. Y'all don't have to write all this down. We're going to send you the slides. So you can write down anything you want. I learned that way, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to scribble everything down that I'm saying. So they are very, very loyal to an organization. Does that mean that other generations aren't loyal? No, it doesn't. Other generations are loyal for different reasons. So this is the generation that was a Ford man, right? I gave this presentation to the young professionals of Knoxville last year, and one of the women in the group had grown up, her grandparents had grown up in Michigan, and I may not get this exactly right. Her grandfather had worked for Goodyear, and she bought Michelin tires, and she said he was on the verge, I can't believe you would have done this to me, right? Still, he's been retired for 20 or 30 years, and he's like, I can't believe you would have bought Michelin tires and done this to me. We're a Goodyear family. And she's like, but they were like 30% off. They were cheaper. They're better. They were cheaper. Didn't matter. Loyal to the organization because that organization took care of them, right? That changes for different generations. That changes. They innovate only when things are broken, right? Only when things are broken. So they will not innovate for innovation's sake, generally speaking. Now, you're going to have outliers in any generation, right? You're going to have that sort of mad scientist personality who's always tinkering around with something in any generation. But by and large, when we're in these big assumptions, we're going to innovate when it's broken. Other than that, we're going to follow the rules. Okay? We're going to do what everybody's done before us, and we're going to trust the authority figure that says this is the right system. Okay? So this is that resistance to change, right? They, whoever they is up the chain, told me this will work. I got to figure out how to make it work. If it's broken, I'll innovate around it, but I'm not ever going to question whether there's a better way to do this. When it comes to compensation, promotion, those sorts of things, they want to be rewarded for a job well done. You hear the hard work come through in that, right? So they want to show up, do the work, and be rewarded on the back end. That changes. That changes. Does that mean that the rest of us don't care about being rewarded for a job well done? No. These shifts become really, really, really subtle between generations. Anybody have questions about the silent generation? Okay. So let's talk about boomers. This will be where some of these differences start to become clear. What shaped baby boomers? Who were they when they were young? The civil rights movement. So hippies, they were hippies, right? Many of them were hippies. Many of them were either veterans or hippies, right? They participated in things like the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, those sorts of things. They are a big generation, and they saw it not only as their right, but as their obligation to make social change. Right? Not only out there in the world, but also within organizations. Right? This is the first generation of women really to go to work outside the home. Didn't mean that women didn't work before. This is the first generation of women to really say, I want to forge a career in the same way the men around me have. Right? What does that mean? They grew up without technology, but work is such a core part of who they are that they will use technology for work. Right? And I'm going to use my mom as an example here. My mother is extremely proficient at email. Extremely proficient at email. Extremely proficient in using the internet. Right? Because she had to do all of that for work. But if I take her to a restaurant and there isn't a menu and she has to use a QR code to order her food, it makes her irrationally frustrated. And I'm like, really, this is a lot easier. than that other thing you were doing. But it makes her angry because to her, technology is a work tool. Is a work tool. Okay? So these folks will adapt to technology if you show them why it makes their work easier. But they are not technology natives. Right? They are going to grump. They're going to fuss about the expense often. And if you're doing technology for technology's sake and they say, I don't have cell phone signal. The QR code is peeling up off the table. Wouldn't it just be easier to bring me a paper menu? So they're the group that really starts to pressure test, are our technology solutions really solutions, or are they just technology for the sake of technology? So there's some frustration that comes in here, but there's also some wisdom, right? There's also some wisdom. They will prefer face-to-face, but they can use digital interactions at work, right? So they can engage in things like video conferencing. They certainly are more comfortable on the telephone, right? Many of them can type themselves, right? Those sorts of things, they're more flexible when it comes to those things. They do not change jobs very easily or very frequently, right? Because that was not how you got ahead for them. When they came of age in the workforce, you stayed with an organization and you worked your way through it. Once you get to Generation X and below, that starts to change and you advance in your career in a different path. But for these folks, they do still have some similarities with that older generation of you enter the workforce, you see it through. Right? So they are not people who are looking to job hop, right? And you will hear them talk about, oh, they're a job hopper. I don't know what that means. Right? You heard this, right? They're a job hopper. So they will value a lot of security in their workforce. A lot of security, okay? They're hard workers, but not from a value system. They drive for goals. So after these people were hippies or veterans or participating in civil rights sorts of things when they were young, who were they when they entered the workforce? Yuppies, right? Our hippies became yuppies. I don't know why, it just is. They were extremely goal-driven and extremely driven by personal success. By personal success, right? And their work, the work that they did in the world was tied very, very closely to their self-worth. To their self-worth. The other thing you're going to start to notice here as we start to stack generations is how the way one generation and its parenting style impacts the next generation, right? So remember this when we start to talk about Xers, okay? But these folks were very, very goal-motivated, very tied to their self-worth. I am the work that I do. I am the work that I do. They are loyal, but loyal to team over the organization. These are my people, right? When you think about senior executives moving and taking an entire executive team with them or taking their entire sort of close reports with them, more often than not, they're going to fall in this generation, right? If you think about the big visible places where that's happened, think about the news reports that you've read about that. These people are going to take their team. These are the people I can trust. These are the people I know will help me achieve my goals. So I'm loyal, but not to Goodyear or to Ford or to ABC Co. I'm loyal to these people who are in it with me. Okay? So the loyalty changes. It changes. And that means we have to talk about loyalty in different ways for them. Okay? They challenge authority. Right? They challenge authority because they were a big enough generation to do that. They were a big enough generation to do things like challenge the war, challenge civil rights. I often find myself wondering when I give this presentation or when I'm preparing for it, like, had those events happened when Gen X was that age, would we have been big enough to make a change? And I don't know, right? I don't know. But I do know that they were big enough to make the changes that they thought were important to make, right? And so they will really push to challenge authority. Now, many of them are now in authority, and they're not so keen on being pushed. Right? They're not so keen on being pushed. But there is this streak in them that says it's okay to challenge authority. In the way that for the silent generation it was, no, that's what they said. That's the way it is, right? Those are the rules. These people will challenge that, and they prefer flat organizations. This is that sort of that vestige of we don't trust the man, right? We don't trust the big power layers that are going up there. We want flat organizations where there's not a lot of reporting structure. And what they want to be rewarded for, rather than their hard work, is their skill. Okay? They really, really value becoming masters at what they do. Right? I am the best at boop, whatever it is. And they want to be rewarded and valued for that. Okay? Any questions about boomers?
You described me.
Does this make sense? Does this resonate with you?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, she's in my head.
Don't worry. Everybody else is about to get their turn, right? All the rest of us are about to get our turn. So let's talk then about Gen Z. So, I'm sorry, Gen X. Who else is in Gen X with me? Okay. So what shaped us? MTV, right? Why were we able to watch MTV?
Cable.
Yes. And why else?
Internet?
Maybe.
Well, no, not MTV, but.
I was going to say, I was in college before the internet really, and even in college, I was like, I don't know, why do we need that? What are we ever going to do with that? That doesn't make any sense. Largely, I don't know about you, but I was able to watch MTV because there was nobody home but me and my brother, right? If my mom had been home when I was watching, whatever I was watching on MTV, that would have been curtailed significantly, I can promise you. Latchkey kids, yeah. How do you think this big generation of latchkey kids was shaped by that experience? We did have to be independent, and we like being independent. And we're generally responsible, right? We will take care of ourselves, we will make our own macaroni and cheese, and we expect these people who are coming up behind us to be able to make their own macaroni and cheese too, right? You need to be able to let yourself in the house, feed the dog, make your own macaroni and cheese, empty the dishwasher, and have things squared away before people get home, right? What else shaped us? We alluded to it here. So we were shaped by the dawn of computers and technology really coming into our life. Who played Oregon Trail? Right? Dysentery. Yes, I've died of typhus more times than I can count, right? So we were shaped by those sorts of things. We understood that world, and when it started to come about, we maybe didn't quite get why it was such a big deal, but we adapted to it very quickly, okay? So most people who are Xers, it depends on where you fall. So at the older end of the X generation, people entered the workforce and didn't have personal computers on their desks, right? By the time I entered the workforce, so I'm a 1978er, by the time I entered the workforce, everybody had a personal computer on their desk and was expected to know how to use it. It was standard issue, right? You had a phone, you had a Rolodex, still had a Rolodex. We did not have smartphones. We had a personal computer. So that shaped who we were. We learned how to use those things. But we are not digital natives in the way that our children are, right? We are not digital natives. We are equally comfortable, and this is one of the important roles that Gen X plays, is in some ways they have a foot in both worlds, right? In some ways we are the bridge between our parents and our kids, right? Or the generation that's just a little bit older than us and just a little bit younger than us, particularly when it comes to technology. Because we're the group that will say, like, no, you need to be able to send this email. No, it really is better if we can send this out in a text. But also the group that will say, can you please just come down the hall and talk to me? Rather than us sending 17 emails back and forth, can we just get on the phone and talk through this? So we're equally comfortable with that face-to-face human interaction and the technology interactions. We are self-reliant and financially responsible, right? Self-reliant because we didn't have a choice. This is maybe the last generation that had the experience of being shoved out the door and told to come home when the street lights come on, right? And in between there, try not to die. Or go to jail. What's the thing that goes around? Don't add to the population, don't detract from the population, and don't end up in jail. Yeah. Good rules. So we're self-reliant, largely self-reliant. This bubbles over in the workforce because we are generally self-reliant. By and large, again, lots of personal differences here, but by and large, this generation prefers individual work over team-based work. Is that true, Xers? Yeah. Not that we won't work collaboratively, but we like to rise and fall on our own merits. We will work together, we like to be graded individually, okay? I had one of the people who was at this presentation that I did not long ago for estate planners, he's a friend of mine, and he texted me earlier this week and said, so I had a grumpy Xer moment, and I said, oh yeah, what was that? And he said, I'm in there and I'm working, it's like 7, and obviously when you come in at 7, you're trying to get something done, and this kid, who is probably 25, comes bopping down the hall and says, hey, do you want to go get coffee? And I'm like, no, I don't want to go get coffee. Leave me alone. And I was like, yep, that's it. That's generational difference because they want to connect. They want to connect, right? We prefer to work individually. Gen Xers are loyal to a leader. Loyal to a leader. Okay? They want to work. If they're working for the right leader, they will do almost anything to exceed that leader's expectations. Okay? Different than loyal to an organization as a whole. I'm loyal to you as the person who has invested in me. I will follow you. So when our boomers take a team with them, the team they're taking is often Xers. Right? Because I'm loyal to this leader who's taking me where I want to go. They're flexible because we've seen a lot of change, right? We have started to see in this generation the pace of change become quicker, right? So think about all the technological advancement from the 1875 until 1975, and then think about the pace of technological advancement from 1975 until now, all right? So we start to see the pace of change and by and large the comfortability with change start to increase in this generation. This is also the generation that starts to talk about the balance word, right? Work-life balance starts with these folks. Why? Because our parents didn't have it, right? One of the things that shapes us as individuals is how we were raised, right? Which is shaped by the generational differences of our parents largely. So these folks are going to look at this and go, wait a minute. It was a lot of fun to make my own macaroni and cheese and watch MTV, but I'm not sure that's what I want for my kids, right? Maybe I want something different, and maybe to have that, this has to be a part of my life. What else shaped this for these folks? There's another big thing at play. What starts to happen about the workforce? What do these people see? Their parents getting laid off, right? So their parents who are loyal, who stick it out, who sort of get their legs chopped out from under them like 10 years before, and they go, I'm not working like a dog to have that happen to me, right? Enron. These sorts of things start to shape. We start to see the effects of 2008. So I was just freshly into the workforce when 2008 happened, right? I was in my late 20s. We start to see the effects of that, where people are like, wait a minute. These big institutions that nobody ever thought were going to go under are going under. Maybe I should rethink what all this means in terms of my whole life, okay? So they start to see work as part of their life. Anybody have questions about Gen X? hit pretty closely, Xers? Anything you would add?
One thing.
Yes?
I feel like in our generation, a lot of women started a career right out of college and waited to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like our parents had children in their early 20s, and a lot of us didn't have children until our 30s or older.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just curious how that's going to shape.
So there's some evidence coming out of Gen Z that they're going to have their children young, raise their children, and then go into the workforce. It's not statistically significant enough to say, yes, it's truly going to be the way it is, but there's starting to be some data that says, like, women are having their children young, then establishing themselves and making their big run, rather than trying to establish themselves and hold on to all of it and keep it all going at the same time. So that is an important difference.
That'll be interesting to see how COVID affected that.
Mm-hmm. So COVID is one of these things that's going to come in and overlay all generations. So some of the things we've talked about, and certainly World War II overlaid all the generations, these all affect everybody who's alive at that time. But there are certain things that affect the way we view work and economics and security. COVID is one of those things, and I think it is going to change some of the things that we're talking about here. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about millennials. How many millennials in the room? Okay. What shaped you guys? What's the biggest driver that shaped you? I'm sorry?
Cell phones?
Cell phones? Maybe. Sorry? 9/11. When sociologists point to the biggest drivers behind millennials, it's 9/11. And not so much the way 9/11 affected you, it's more about the way 9/11 affected your parents and how they responded to you, right? So 9/11 created this sense of the world is not safe in the way that we thought it was. And many, many parents responded to that by saying, I can keep them safe, right? So those of you who get frustrated, and I've had these experiences too, like, can I bring my mom to my job interview? No, you can't bring your mom to the job interview. We're going to do your performance review. Can I bring my mom? No, you can't bring your mom. You're 28 years old. You cannot bring your mom to your performance review. No. But, right, what's important to remember about that is that comes from a place that makes sense. When we're able to pull back and think about it, those moms got really scared about what the world meant for these little kids, right? And they swooped in and protected them. Is that the only thing? No. Cell phones start to affect here. They don't affect this generation quite in the same way that they're going to affect Gen Z, but they affect. They are digitally revolutionized. Digitally revolutionized, which means that while you may be an old enough millennial that these things didn't technically exist when you were young, you probably don't remember that. And certainly those of you that are on the younger end of the millennial generation don't remember that. So they really have never known a world where the internet wasn't a big part of our lives, where smartphones weren't a big part of our lives. Even though for some of them that wasn't necessarily the case, that's sort of their reality, right? And what that means is when we get down here to talk about the pace of change, they see change as just, hey, this is the way the world is, right? Things change. And we kind of like it, and we're kind of comfortable with it, and we kind of push for it, okay? They were also shaped heavily by the Great Recession, 2008, and it's all of its fallout, right? I won't ask people to raise their hands, but this is the generation where we saw people go to grad school because they couldn't get a job, right? Or, so I was practicing law when 2008 happened, and we were hiring people out of law school that made less money than our receptionist. That's how far wages for new grads had fallen. And so if you come out into the work world and that's your reality, you don't know if you can get a job, you don't know what kind of money you're going to make. If you do get a job, you're not sure if you'll ever be able to buy a house, right, because of what's going on in the housing market and who even understands it or knows what that's about. That shapes the way that you show up and work, right? This is the part where I normally see millennials like, yeah, Tell them about why we are the way we are, right? It's okay. It is okay, right? So what's good about millennials is they're extremely loyal. How many of you in this room who are not millennials would have said millennials were extremely loyal? Why? Experience, yeah. Millennials are loyal to their colleagues, right? Not to the team that supports them, not to the single leader, not to the organization. They're loyal to the people that are in the trenches with them, right? If you want to keep them, you let them connect, okay? You build circumstances where they can build strong relationships with their teams. That triggers that sense of loyalty for them. They expect to be treated equitably. Not equally, but equitably. They want a fair shake, and they're not as willing to wait on it as other generations because they're not sure they can trust it will come. They're not sure they can trust it will come. It makes sense when we think about the things that shape them, right? We see trust really dip in this generation. I think with good reason. They see their careers, first of all, not as this straight line, right? It's a much wavier line. They also see their careers as a chance to contribute. A chance to contribute. If you can connect what you're doing, what they're doing with a mission, particularly a mission that resonates out in the world somewhere, you can keep these folks engaged and working really, really hard for you. The why starts to become much more important with these folks. Those of us that are a little bit older, we're like, look, you work, that's what you do, right? You go to work, you make money, that's how you support your family. For these folks, it's different. It's different, right? They place a really high value on career development. And I think millennials have gotten a particularly bad shake here. So I'm gonna soapbox for a minute if you'll indulge me. I think that millennials' early push when they first came into the workforce, and look, none of us come fresh out of school and we're like the most suave career movers that we're going to be, right? If most of us think back to our early career experiences and some of the early conversations we have had, we would go back and go, oh, that was dumb. I don't know why I did that way. But many of their early requests for career development, I think were misinterpreted as promote me now. Right? Promote me now. But for the silent generation, for boomers, you show up to work, you work hard, and you can trust that that organization is going to train you, they're going to put you through the ranks, they're going to promote you. All you have to do is show up and work hard. That is not the experience that millennials have had in the work world. They saw what their parents went through, they saw 2008 happen, they saw the fallout from that, and they saw companies in response to 2008 ratchet down their training and development budgets, right? So for them, they have to knock on the door and say, please develop me. Or they have to leave and go to a company that will let them. So they get a bad rap, I think, for pushing for promotion before they're ready, and they get a bad rap for being job jumpers when really, maybe through nobody's fault, that was just the experience that was reality for them. Does that make sense to you guys? Are there some that are impatient? Sure. Are there some Gen Xers that were impatient and wanted to be promoted before they were ready? Absolutely. Absolutely. They value authority figures who can demonstrate competence. Right? These are not people who are willing to put their trust in you because you're older than them, or you have a certain set of letters behind your name, or you sit in a certain block on the org chart. You've got to prove it to them. Why? Enron, 2008, Bear Stearns, right? Think about all the really smart, really old people who were driving the bus right over the side of the cliff, right? So they're watching to make sure you know what you're doing. Again, they're very, very fluid, and they expect a great deal of change. Questions about millennials? Yes?
I'd say maybe protective too, because me being a son of a single mom, I'm very protective of her. So it's, I think we're also protective of the people that we love, for sure.
So you think that goes both ways?
100%.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard anybody say that, but that makes sense to me. Yeah. Yes?
I'm an eligible millennial here.
Yeah.
But, and I was actually raised by boomer parents, so
Okay.
I kind of see both Gen X and I'm kind of on the cusp there. But in my workforce, I'll have a lot of people that millennials seem to get the worst rap of everything. But I always remind them, well, you're the generation that raised the millennials the way that they are, or and, for the next generation. So we are the way we are because we were raised and we were shaped.
That's right. And we were shaped by, if you don't walk away with anything else, here's what I want you to walk away with. Every generation is shaped by forces outside their control. Just like the silent generation didn't create World War II or the Great Depression, just like the baby boomers didn't create Vietnam, right? Just like we didn't choose to be latchkey kids, just like nobody chose for 9/11 to happen. These things happen, right? These things happen, and it changes who we are, and it changes how we show up. And if we can just start there and say every generation has its own experience and every individual within that generation has their own experience, right? That starts a conversation in a different way than saying all millennials are this, right? Or you can't do anything with these Gen Z people. Yes?
So when it comes to the idea that trust is a little bit more fragile, and when we're talking about career development, is this a good place to put more emphasis on laying out a clear path for this generation, and then also being aware that if those benchmarks aren't reached, or at least on your end, then the trust goes away?
Yeah. Yeah, for this generation, and certainly for the one that's about to follow, that's sort of coming into the workforce, you need to be able to lay out a career path. I would, to avoid getting caught in a trust trap, because we all know that sometimes we say, like, I see you in this position, and then it doesn't happen for whatever reason. Talk about skills development. Say, I would like to see you learn this additional skill. I think it would be a really nice add-on if you could learn this additional thing over here or get really good at this. That way you're not making a promise, right? Anybody who's raising kids knows you better not make a promise that you then can't keep because you have strep throat or something. You can't make a promise to this generation or the one that's younger. So you have to be really careful how you do this. Talk about skills development rather than you could be up for promotion in 2 years, because if it's 3, they're going to start giving you side eye. Okay? Yeah. I was going to say something else about career development. Maybe it'll come back. Let's hold on. Here's what I was going to say. There's interesting research coming out of McKinsey, and we'll talk about sort of the talent crunch and how this all plays into generations. But there's interesting research coming out of McKinsey right now about how do we keep and bring back some of these generations into the workforce. And there are some similarities in how you keep millennials and Z engaged, and how do we perhaps bring some of those boomers that have retired early, right? How do we bring them back into the workforce? So if I don't circle back to that, will you keep me on track and raise your hand and make sure I do? All right, let's talk about Gen Z. These folks are digital natives. What does that mean? This is the generation of folks where we said, here's an iPad, right? Not quite yet, but my son is 14. The oldest of these folks are 25. We definitely had iPads. We definitely had smartphones. We definitely had those things when my oldest one was born. So we're getting close to seeing that first wave of kids come into the workforce that grew up with an iPad in their hands and could work it better than their parents when they were 2 years old. They are true digital natives, and they see technology as essential. Who's raising somebody in this generation? What's the best way to punish them? Absolutely, man, absolutely. It's like I said I'm just going to hold your throat until you can't breathe for like 2 minutes. And they would rather I do that than like take their phone, right? So they see technology as essential. We drove through a spot yesterday with my boys. They're 14 and 12. We drove through a spot. We were without cell coverage for 3 minutes.
That's the end of the world.
And the griping and moaning. The internet is awful. We don't have any coverage. How am I supposed to watch TikTok? right? I'm like, I'm really sorry that the cell coverage is bad here. But you know what we did in the car? As our mother was driving us to our after-school activities, we listened to whatever she wanted on the radio, right? So you're fine. They see this as essential. And if you don't speak their language, you're going to have a tough time, right? Now, this is really good in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it's not, because how do they communicate? With their cell phones. They will literally, we will have 10 boys at our house. Sometimes they communicate, sometimes they ignore you, right? Yeah, that's fair. They will sit in a line of 10 and they don't talk, they just, I'm like, you're supposed to be spending time. Why am I feeding all your friends if you're just going to text each other, right? Same thing happens in the workforce. We start to hear older generations say, not only do they not want to have a conversation, we're not sure they have the baseline skills to look another human being in the eye and have a conversation, right? So I want you to start to think about where are the various strengths and weaknesses of the generations and how do we meld those together, okay? But they are digital natives. They focus, right? So millennials were very much about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Everybody's equal, everybody's the same. Gen Z is really different in this regard. To a certain extent, they don't even see that. They don't like to talk about people in terms of race. They don't like to talk about people in terms of religion. They just talk about people as individuals. And my colleagues who do a lot of work in this diversity, equity, and inclusion space, they're really struggling with how do we talk to these people, because the old nomenclature that we've been using that we thought was doing all the good in the world, they're like, yeah, that's awful. Don't talk about people that way, right? So they really, all the effort that we've done to have people sort of break down some of those barriers, this generation is the generation that has accomplished that. They're really loyal to their experience, to their individual experience, which means they want to have a cool work experience. Does that mean what you may think it means? No. What it means is they want to have a great working experience. They want somebody to talk to them as an individual. They want somebody to welcome them. Onboarding with these folks becomes really, really important because that's the first place that you start to hook them in. Okay? They expect to be engaged. And what I mean by that is, think about folks, I don't want to offend anybody in the room, but think about folks who are 25 or younger. Have they ever had the opportunity to be bored? In the way like in 1984 when it was Saturday in June and the only thing on television was The Wide World of Sports, and it was that or ride my bicycle around the same block 400 times? They don't, right? They expect to be engaged because they have always been engaged. They have always been able to pull up a video. They also expect to be able to get instant answers, right? So frustration, this is where we start seeing any of your, you may have folks in your workplace who have started to talk about this. Certainly kids who are in middle school and high school right now are starting to talk about this idea of a growth mindset, of being able to find the value in working through hard problems, because frustration becomes a real problem for these folks. When you're having to write your research paper using the World Book, right, and the volume that you need to write your paper is missing from the library, well, you just get frustrated. But they've never had that experience because they can Google anything. I can do it too, right? I can do it too. I'm watching a movie and I'm like, what else has this person been in? Well, I can know, right? What else did we see this person in? Well, I can just answer that question. That really shapes the way people work in ways that we don't always think about, okay? So they expect to be engaged. They prefer collaborative work experiences. They want to work in groups and they want to collaborate because that's the way they've been taught in school. That's the way they've been taught in school. So they're fine. And those of us who are Xers who are like, please, please, please just let us work, right? This is a particular mismatch that we're going to have to watch out for, right? And we're just going to have to try our best to find a happy medium here. but they want to work collaboratively in ways that frankly just doesn't compute for many of us in our brains, okay? They highly value flexibility, and in ways, we're not talking about remote work here. This is the generation that starts to say, like, don't set my work hours for me. I want to be free to work when I'm at my best, all right? So they're going to really push the boundaries. Now, they're not as big as millennials. There's not as many of them in the workforce. So we'll see if COVID pairs up with them as a generation and changes this for all of us, but they're going to really push the boundaries when it comes to flexibility. And at least right now, they're going to value that flexibility over things like pay and benefits. Now, what do we know about people who are 25? They probably don't have a mortgage, right? They likely don't have kids yet. So we'll see if this starts to change, right? I always had the older people in the group go, well, of course they don't care about pay. They don't have any responsibilities yet. That's not entirely fair, but this may change as this generation ages, okay? They are extremely agile, particularly in terms of technology. Change doesn't bother these folks. It doesn't upset them. They, in some ways, crave it. So when you think about expecting to be engaged, they are always looking. By and large, as a generation, they are innovators. They are a generation of innovators. If you can tap into that and give that a voice and find out how to make it orderly in your organization, right? We obviously can't chase down every idea that anybody has, but they will really benefit the organization if we can find a way to harness that. They see their careers as a chance to grow as people, right? And you will not hear them talk about things like balance. That doesn't make sense to them. They talk about, this is a part of my life. They will talk about things like integration often, or they just don't talk about it at all, right? They just don't talk about it at all. I've had clients say to me, like, where'd the idea of balance go? Well, it went to flexibility, right? They're tired of talking about what the problem is. They want to solve it, right? They're going to talk about flexibility and being able to work on their terms and being able to fit their work around their life, okay? Again, we're just starting to see these folks come into the workplace, so some of this remains to be seen, but these are the things that we think are going to shape them. Any questions about Gen Z? Okay. So you can see the themes that have emerged, the challenges that we have in working together. Our comfort with technology, different sets of values, unconscious bias, communication style, work style, all of these places are places where we have potential mismatch, right? Potential mismatch. So what do we do with this? And the problem is, no one generation is right. It's not that there's a norm and we're trying to fold a new generation in. It's that there are already mismatches that exist between the silent generation and boomers and Xers and millennials, and now we're going to fold Z in. So we are already having miscommunications, misunderstanding, assumptions about one another, and we're just folding another layer on top. And generally speaking, they tend to fall in one of these buckets, okay? So the first mistake that we make is that we don't think about age like we think about other items of diversity, right? How many of you are in an organization where diversity is a significant focus or impetus of the work that you're doing, where you're like, yeah, we're going to pay attention to that, we're going to talk about diversity, we're going to do diversity training? Do you include age?
Yes.
Good, good. We're starting to see this, but this is one of the big mistakes that we make. Well, diverse organizations are strong organizations, and that includes age, right? So this is often a way to get folks who are boomers on board with this, because boomers are the generation that cared about things like civil rights, right? So they are really that pushing the edge of that diversity and inclusion sometimes, right? And sometimes they get this blind spot when it comes to, let's talk about young workers, right? So if you can talk about age in terms of diversity, in terms of the benefits that it brings, what are the benefits? Well, we know that diverse teams are about 30% more productive than teams that are sort of homogenous, right? And that includes age. We also know that the organizations that are the most diverse, when compared to the organizations that are the least diverse, outrank, they have an advantage when it comes to profitability of about 36%. So how many of you would like to raise your profits by 36%? I think that sounds pretty good. So it impacts your productivity and your bottom line to keep these people on board. So you need to include the idea that organizations that embrace lots of ages are more robust. And that doesn't mean we hold our nose and tolerate one another, right? The important word in that is embrace, right? Embrace. It means we start to learn from one another, we start to accept one another, we start to try to understand one another. So that's mistake number one and a way to shift it. The other thing is what we've been doing. So how many of you have gone to other presentations about generations and they talked about how the generations were different and bam, that's where it stopped? Yeah, it's a very natural thing, right? But I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we bring people into training or into conversations and we talk about the differences between the generations and then we leave it there. And the truth is that all of us have more in common than we have that's different, right? All of your employees want to do a good job. All of your employees who are good-willed, good-intentioned employees, right? And you have those in every generation, want to do a good job. They want to show up. They want good feedback from you. They may want it in a different way, but they want to know they're on the right track. They want to feel like they're contributing to something. What makes them feel that way might be different from different generations, but they all want that, okay? We all work for some sort of sense of meaning in our life in addition to pay and benefits and all of those sorts of things. So we have more in common than they have that's different from one another. We also start to see this horseshoe effect, which is at the ends of the generations, we start to see some similarities kind of emerge. So your older workforce, that silent generation, somebody said, hey, they miss a lot of work for health reasons, right? And your millennials may be missing work to raise young children, right? Or your Z generation may be wanting flexibility. So you start to see this horseshoe effect where at the either end of the extreme, they start to bend back together and have a lot in common. So start to look for, as an employer, as a leader, as a manager, what do all of these people have in common? And how can I tap into what they have in common and speak to all of them in a way that makes sense? Okay? The other thing we can do is really nurture communication. Really nurture communication. So one of the things that we can do to do that is to really create these mutual mentoring relationships. So how many of you have mentoring programs or have had a mentor or have been a mentor? Anybody? Not even in a formal way. So how does that usually work?
It's usually a more experienced person in a certain area mentoring a less experienced person.
That's right. So we typically think about mentoring as a top-down sort of experience, right? What the research tells us, though, is that mentors actually get as much from that in terms of career advancement as the people they're mentoring. And mutual mentorship, it's this idea that's emerged in response to this generational divide in the workplace. And it's the idea that, hey, we've got an older section of our workforce who can resolve customer issues because they can look people in the eye and have tough conversations. And we have a younger part of our workforce who can manage technology like nobody's business. What if we put them together? Right? What if we use the strengths of each to bolster one another? And you have to be a little bit delicate and a little bit artful about how you do this, right? Probably works best one-on-one rather than saying, let's bring everybody of this age and everybody of this age and have a big free-for-all conversation. You want people to have a one-on-one connection. But those mutual mentoring relationships can be really, really important. And they're a great way to get some of the institutional knowledge that you're going to start to lose in your organization. We'll talk about the numbers there. They're really somewhat terrifying. But it's a great way to squeeze some of that institutional knowledge out and get some of those soft skills that a lot of these folks haven't had a chance to learn, right? They just haven't had a chance to learn them. You also have to work to uncover the assumptions that destroy trust. So any of you familiar with the 5 dysfunctions of a team? You've heard of it, read the book, anything like that? You know that the baseline dysfunction is what? Lack of trust, right? And when a team doesn't trust one another, what happens? They stop asking questions, they stop helping one another, they stop doing those sorts of things. Everybody shuts down and goes in their separate directions. Generational differences is one of the places where we can destroy trust almost without realizing it, right? You saw all the differences between the generations. It's really easy for me to assume when you want flexibility, right, that, oh, you just don't have a good work ethic. Now, nobody said that here today, but I think this is the first time I've done this workshop where somebody wasn't brave enough to say, these young kids don't have as good a work ethic as we did, right? That's not it. That's not it. It looks different for them. And so those kinds of assumptions really get in the way and destroy trust. So it's our job as leaders, it's our job as business owners to really look at this and say, what are the things that are destroying trust in and amongst this team? And it's almost always an assumption, right? And then you've got to build conversations around that. You also have, we talked about this at the very beginning, you've got to bridge the gap between communication styles. And some of that is about giving people a shared nomenclature, a shared language to talk to one another. So a lot of what we do when we do team building experiences with clients, a lot of what you all are doing, whether you realize it or not, when you bring your teams together, is giving everybody a common way to talk about things, right? That's why values are so important in organizations, right? This is what matters to us and this is how we talk about it. So having that shared language, bridging communication styles, talking to people about these are the situations when we expect you to pick up the phone. These are the situations when we need you to be available by text, right? Being able to talk through the different modes of communication and when each is important is going to become really critical in managing these kinds of generational differences effectively. All right, any questions about that? Okay. So then the last one is, I think we make a mistake if we are not working to retain at least parts of our older workforce. Now, some of them may not want to be retained, and that's fine. But the numbers here are really shocking. So our demographic changes, not only are they making it such that we've got 5 generations in the workforce, but let me tell you what's happening to your baby boomer workforce. Every day in the United States, every day for the next 19 years, it's a long time, 19 years, 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age. That's a lot of people. Every day in the United States for the next 19 years, 10,000 baby boomers will reach retirement age. Our population is aging, and our working age population, so when they talk about this, they're talking between 16 and 64, that working age population is contracting in the United States at a rate not seen since World War II. Right? Not seen since World War II. We aren't having as many kids. There's not as many people coming into the country, right? So immigration has slowed down. Legal immigration has slowed down. I'm going to stay away from politics, but legal immigration has slowed down in ways that are really important. And we aren't having as many kids. And we have a giant generation leaving the workforce. Okay? We are not big enough. Gen Z is not big enough to replace that gap. It just isn't, right? And we don't suspect, so the littlest kids who are alive today are a new generation. They haven't really been named. They're still sort of tossing it around. We don't suspect that they'll be big enough to fill this gap. And even if they are, they're like 5. You got time to wait on them? No, right? So we need to find ways to keep these folks engaged. There is a way to re-engage these people. Some of it comes with allowing for flexibility. Some of it comes, there's interesting research out of McKinsey about how to tap into these non-traditional labor pools, and there's a non-traditional labor pool associated with each generation. But this is really the big one that's being driven by demographic forces. There's really interesting research that terms these folks relaxers, and they have retired from the organization or are thinking about retiring, but will re-enter the workforce for a really special opportunity or to have a special impact of some kind. And interestingly, the sort of case that they give is not somebody who is of this generation. It's I think he's probably a millennial. Is Rob Gronkowski. Who knows Rob? Yeah, okay. So he retired. What brought him back to football? What brought?
I was gonna say Brady.
Brady, and the chance to
Win a Super Bowl.
win another Super Bowl with Tom Brady. So what you're looking for to keep these people or to bring them back into your workforce is the equivalent of winning another Super Bowl with Tom Brady, right? It's a pet project that you know they always wanted to work on that you couldn't give them the chance to do because they had too many other job responsibilities. It's the chance to mentor and develop Gen Z, right? It's the chance to say, hey, we only need you here 2 days a week. So there's a similarity and flexibility that's going to start to happen for these folks, right? These people want to go visit their grandkids. They need to be out for health reasons. Whatever the case may be, you're starting to see that horseshoe bend where the younger generation and this older generation both value flexibility in really similar ways. So the other thing that I see that's a big mistake is we are missing the chance to try to retain these people, right? And we really need them. Just from a head count standpoint, we really, really need them in the workplace. Okay? So those are the 4 shifts that you need to make. All right? What are you going to do differently? What questions do you have for me? We've got just a few minutes left. Any questions? Yeah?
So with millennials, since they do have a lot of distrust when it comes to authority figures, what would you advise managers to do to build trust with them?
Mm-hmm. So trust is built across 4 components, right? Sincerity. So they better be able to believe that what you're saying is what you really think, right? Sincerity, reliability. You better do what you say you're going to do, right? They want to know that you're competent. And this is trust, regardless of generation, this is how we build trust. So competence, not only are you going to try to do what you're going to do, I know you've got the goods to be able to pull it off, right? And then do you care about me? Do you care about me? And the younger generations really want you to pour into that bucket. You can't lie to them. And in fact, I had somebody the last time I gave this presentation who was of this generation that said, what we want is access to authority. The more access and transparency we get, the more those walls come down, right? It's not that we're trying to go around you. It's not that we're trying to job jump. We want to be able to look your boss's boss in the eye and know that we can trust them too, because we're smart enough to know it's not all up to you. Does that make sense? Yeah. Go ahead.
How do you get the older generations that may have been with the company for a long time, that value loyalty, they've been there, but how do you get them to take their knowledge and want to share it? Because what I see a lot is they don't want to share that knowledge that they have. They're afraid someone's going to take their job or so they typically take what they have and they keep it to themselves. How do you get them to want to and want to share their knowledge?
Mm-hmm. Well, so look, I think we've got to be really fair as organizations about the things that we do that create the things that we don't want. So if every time we have a layoff, we lay off our older workers first, or we offer retirement, or we are sort of riding those people, then they're not going to let their guard down and trust that their job's not at jeopardy, right? So if we do that, we're destroying the trust, right? But if we can show them, here's a path for you, we don't want to lose you. And a lot of them, particularly in manufacturing, are moving into different types of jobs. So you maybe take them off the manufacturing floor and say, hey, we know you don't want to do this particular job that you've been doing. Maybe you don't want to do a supervisor's job day in, day out. We want you to take this role in training, or we want you to take this role in safety. If you can carve out a niche for them that feels safe, that will often help. The other thing is go slow, right? Go really slow and really targeted and say, you are really good at this. So-and-so is struggling with that. Will you partner with them and tell them what you know? Rather than saying this globally, tell them everything you've ever learned, right? Go sort of micro and do really specific skills that you've noticed. Everybody responds well to praise, right? So say, I've noticed you're really good at this. Can you help so-and-so who's having trouble with that? Yeah. Anybody else?
I have a 16-year-old grandson, and I talk to him a lot. He's pretty intelligent, but for me, when I struggle with some younger people, I'll call him and I'll talk to him about it, and he actually can help me. So he's like, Grandma, just, think about how much that I mean to you and how much they mean to somebody else, and they want to show that they can shine to you. So, and that has really helped me to just think of them, because you work more with, you live with the people you work with almost. You're with them, you spend more time with them. So obviously you have to trust them and develop a relationship with them. But he has helped me into doing that.
The thing that you've done with him that we can all, even if we don't have people in our lives of these different generations, is you ask questions.
I do, I ask him questions, and he loves it when I ask him questions. And actually gets him off the phone too, so.
Right, makes it talk to another human being. You're doing
Yes,
so many
because
good
it
things.
drives me crazy when,
Yeah.
I go in a restaurant and I see a family of 5 or 6 or whatever, and they're all on their cell phones. It just drives me crazy. I said, put your dang phones down and talk to each other.
Yeah, yeah. So questions is a really good gateway. Questions are one of the key ways we cut through assumptions, right? As we get curious. Yep.
And I think too, just kind of like drawing from personal experience, not just managing like different generations, but like different people, leading with empathy. And then oftentimes we have an emotional reaction towards something, and kind of taking that emotional reaction and stopping it before you let that out. Because a lot of times things are frustrating. If you can kind of swallow that frustration and then respond back with empathy, I've noticed that that's kind of going a long way.
Yeah. One of the things that I hope you take away from this is not just awareness of other generations, but awareness of the way your views are shaped by the generation in which you live. And this idea that you aren't neutral, right? We all tend to think of ourselves as neutral, right? And everybody else lands on us. But if we can realize when we have that emotional response, like, this is partly the wiring of the person that I'm dealing with, but it's also partly my wiring, right? This is partly my grumpy Gen Xer that's like, please go make your own macaroni and cheese, right? And it's partly this Gen Z person really wants a lot of career development. It's not one way or the other. We're all human beings trying to relate to one another. What else? Yes?
So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what she said up here about her 16-year-old grandson. So my son, he's 30, and he's a manager, so he has a lot of people that are older than him. And when he has an issue, he tries to communicate with them, he'll call me and be like, what do I say to these people? Because they're so much older and they have more experience in life, than he does. And I'm trying to, don't take it personal, when they come at you, because everybody is different on how they take things. If something doesn't go their way, some people are going to lash out and they're going to yell at you. Some people are just going to shut down. You have to find that happy medium and try to communicate with them. So, there's a lot here today that I've learned that I can actually help him out now too.
Yeah.
So.
It's a really complex problem, and you layer the individual differences on top of the generational differences, and this is what makes managing people so fun, right? Some days it is, some days not so much. What else? What other questions? Going once, going twice. I'll hang around for a few minutes. Thank you guys for your attention. We'll get you a copy of the slides, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Leslie. A couple of closing things. If you want your HRCI credits, I'm going to set your certificate right back here at this table. And our next Successor 90 is going to be on May 3rd, so mark your calendars. And Shelby Shanklin is going to be talking about needs-based leadership. So we hope to see you guys on May 3rd. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you.